Good morning to folks who are joining. Nice to see our numbers are jumping rapidly. This is, if you can't see me yet, you can hear me. This is Parker Blackman with the LA Partnership for Early Childhood Investment. We're going to wait for one or two more minutes as we are expecting a double, almost double what we have so far. So thanks for being on time. Gold star to those of you who are here on time. We're going to wait one more minute for other folks to join. So thanks for your patience, and we'll get started shortly. Great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, welcome. This is Parker Blackman. I'm the Executive Director for the LA Partnership for Early Childhood Investment. It's great to have you all with us this morning. Really excited about this conversation on the future of childcare here in California, because I think we're all experiencing the future of childcare is right now. Many of us are dealing with this in this very moment. So this could not be more timely. I'm just going to go over just for a moment a few housekeeping issues, and then I'm going to turn it over to our moderator and our panel. So I want to thank all of you for being here and just tell you a little bit about how this is going to work. We're going to have our moderator sort of provide an opening sort of framing for the conversation and ask our speakers a few questions. And then we're pretty quickly going to get into questions from all of you. So the way that's going to work is if you use the Q&A box on your Zoom screen, which all of you should be able to see right now, and you type a question in there, we'll be able to organize those questions and share them with our moderator so she can answer and direct those questions to our panelists to answer as many of those as possible. We've set up an hour and 15 minutes for this call. We're experimenting a little bit, to be honest. I know that a lot of Zoom meetings have been going an hour. When folks try to do them for an hour and a half or 2 hours, it sometimes puts a strain on everyone's very busy schedule. So we thought if there's enough conversation and questions from you all to go until 11:15, that might be just the right amount of time. So if you can, stay with us till 11:15, and I think it's going to be a great discussion. I want to also thank Southern California Grant Makers, our partner in these kinds of meetings. Chris and Tuli and Bethany and the rest of the team, thank you so much. You guys have been stalwart, steady partners. So we really appreciate working together with Southern California Grant Makers. And for those of you who are not familiar with the LA Partnership for Early Childhood Investment, we're a public-private partnership with more than 25 foundations as members, and we work collaboratively with public agencies, school districts, cities, etc., looking for ways for philanthropy to be a catalyst to invest in systems change that benefit the most vulnerable children and families in LA County. And that could not be more important on this topic of childcare. So we're really thrilled for this conversation. The last thing I'll say is these quarterly meetings that we do, we really want to emphasize that they are to help educate, but not just to learn, but to learn for action. So we've asked our moderator and speakers today to come prepared to talk about where are the opportunities for philanthropy to lean in partnership with the county and other public actors to really help change the system for the better for those most vulnerable children and families. So hopefully we'll have some good thoughts on that today in a robust discussion. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Becca Patton, who's the Director of Early Care and Education at First 5 LA, who not only is a great person to moderate this conversation, but a real expert in her own right on this. So I really appreciate, Becca, you taking the time to be with us today and share your knowledge and expertise, and I leave it to you to kick off this conversation. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Parker. Appreciate that introduction. So really glad to be here with you all today. So we're going to be diving deep into the current state of childcare this morning. Before I introduce our panelists and kind of dive into our discussion, I just want to set the stage for our conversation today. As most of you know, before the COVID pandemic, our childcare system was already inadequately funded. Families experience long waiting lists for childcare. More often than not, those waiting lists never even result in a space for their children. Early educators experience wages that are far below living wage and at times are even closer to poverty level wages. And our quality support system that is designed for childcare providers is unevenly accessible, often only reaching providers who are already the most resourced. So before COVID, there's already a lot of injustice undergirding our childcare system. And it's sort of with this backdrop that our system, but more importantly, our communities and families experienced the pandemic. So in early March, LA County had over 8,000 childcare providers operating close to 260,000 spaces. By early April, after the issuing of the Safer at Home order, that number was slashed in half, with only 4,000 providers still in operation. So the racial and gender inequities that were inherent in our childcare system has been exacerbated by COVID. We know that Black and Latinx communities are experiencing higher rates of infection, hospitalization, and death from COVID because of the racism that permeates our society. So we now have a compounding effect within our childcare system. Most of our workforce and most of our families are predominantly people of color. So our panel today is going to highlight a lot of these challenges. It is also going to reflect, though, on some of the lessons we've learned and identify where we have discovered places of resilience within our childcare system. And we're going to offer suggestions on how to build back better. So I'm going to introduce our panelists today, who are actually dear colleagues of mine. And I can truly say that our field is better because they are in it. So our first panelist is Deborah Coleman, Director for the Office for the Advancement of Early Care and Education within our own LA County Department of Public Health. Deborah has over 20 years experience leading innovative initiatives for children and families. And she was most recently my co-conspirator, where she also served on the early care and education team with me at First 5 LA. So we are also joined by Barry Ignatius, statewide organizer for Parent Voices, which is a parent-led grassroots organizing effort to ensure equitable access to quality, affordable childcare for low-income families. She is also a former Blue Ribbon Commissioner and currently serves on the Early Childhood Policy Council. We also will be joined by Mike Olenek. He's having some technical difficulties, so I am going to introduce him, and then he can join the conversation once he's with us. So Mike Olenek is the president and CEO of the Child Care Resource Center, one of the largest resource and referral agencies in the state. He is also a former Blue Ribbon Commissioner and is currently on the California Child Welfare Commission and the Board of Directors for 0 to 3. So let's start our discussion. And to open the discussion today, I just have a general question for our panelists. Sort of how would you describe the state of childcare in California presently? And I'll leave it up to Deborah or Mary to take it from there.
I'll start the discussion. Becca, and I know that Mary and Mike will have a lot to add. So good morning, everyone. I have had the honor in LA County to be a part of the LA County Early Care and Education COVID-19 response team, which also Becca Patton and Mike Olnick also sit on the leadership of. And through that work, we've tried our best to be responsive, to try to make sure that early care and education is able to continue to operate, that they have the resources and they have the advocacy strength behind them to manage this pandemic. I can say without a doubt that our early care and education system has continued to be on the front lines, and many have never closed from the very beginning. Our Safer at Home order that is signed by our public health officer in LA County wrote early care and education into the public health order. So a few things to know. Currently, about 54% of early care and education providers are open. That's a little over 4,000. Most of those are family childcare, and I do have to do a shout out to family childcare. Without them, I don't know what our system would have done with this pandemic. They have truly been our stronghold, with about 70% of them remaining open throughout the COVID-19 crisis. Also, it's a little bit easier for family childcare to manage the public health guidelines. Although we have guidelines throughout the state, in LA County, since our community transmission is a little bit more rampant, we have a mandatory group cap of 10 children per group per classroom. And what this has done is impacted the operating expenses of every childcare provider that remains open. Their costs have at least doubled and sometimes tripled as the care of children go up because their economy of scale has shifted. And I'll close by saying, because of this, there is a huge need to cover the operating expenses for childcare providers to continue to be able to be the caregivers of our workforce as we navigate this pandemic.
And then Mary, would love to hear from you. And then even just what are some lessons learned as we're navigating this pandemic?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me on. I think simply to answer the question is, what is the state of childcare in California, is that we're on the verge of collapse. I mean, I don't mean to be so hysterical about it, but we were already on the verge prior to COVID, as Becca just described. But when you layer on all of the impacts and the basic complete abandonment of our system, I don't know how much further we can ask not only our childcare, but mostly how much we can ask our childcare providers to hold on to such a tenuous system. And when you look at who that workforce is, it is predominantly women of color, Black women, women from immigrant communities. Owning a childcare business has been part of their American dream, except it's left them with no reserves, no ability to really have a savings to deal with a crisis like this. And so we're seeing closures, and the ones who are still holding on by a thread, I don't know how much longer they can hold on. And we've been asking for far too long, these women of color, to bear the brunt. And it's really behooves all of us to step up and protect them. Some of the lessons that we've learned through this COVID crisis is that I think in crisis, there's also a lot of opportunity. And we have, as Parent Voices, have really been advocating to increase access to affordable childcare. In California, statewide, the numbers are around 2 million children are eligible for childcare assistance. And we make little incremental increases every year. However, we're never going to have enough to meet the demand. And COVID actually the response to COVID by the legislature and the governor and the federal government to invest dollars allowed us to create a new childcare voucher program for essential workers. And I think what we learned from that is that for me, from Parent Voices, all of the essential workers are our members. They're grocery workers, agricultural workers, janitors, CNAs, medical assistants, you name it. They are the ones who are out there risking their lives so that we can stay home and protect our families. And our members who are essential workers, they have been on the waiting list for years. Sometimes their children arrive to 5, 6, 7, 8 years old before they ever get called. And so this opportunity allowed for these members to be able to get affordable childcare in a way that, had this not happened, they would have never gotten childcare. And so to ensure that they have stable childcare while they're out there risking their lives has been really critical. What we've also learned is that childcare has always been essential before, during, and after this crisis. And I think there's a lot of movement and momentum happening. You just saw yesterday, Vice President Biden released a $750 billion plan. Our legislature and the governor responded as quickly as they could. Everywhere across the media, New York Times, LA Times, all over the place, everyone's talking about childcare. So we are hoping that through this crisis, this system finally gets the resources and supports it needs and deserves, because of the role it plays, the fundamental role it plays in society and the economy. Another opportunity is that we have seen our members, our low-income members of color, come together and rally and put forth recommendations on how to respond to COVID in a way that not other advocates had kind of thought about. Our members immediately, when we were talking about essential worker emergency childcare vouchers, also wanted to lift up children with families who have children with special needs, families facing homelessness or domestic violence, that they are in crisis right now and also need childcare as an emergency response. And so, you know, for those of you who are investing in systems change, whether it's locally, statewide, or across the nation, please, I just behoove you to include parents as policy partners. They have a unique expertise, particularly when it comes to language and culture and race, that not all researchers or institutions at 30,000 feet are really thinking about. And so that process is critical to have parents as part of it. And then the last thing, and I can go into this a little bit deeper later, is just this crisis has also revealed the racial disparities in our childcare system. And I think that our childcare system in particular has been so late to the game in having an analysis around race, class, and gender, but particularly race. We have policies and systems in place that perpetuate racial disparities, that add incredible burden and administrative burden and just kind of hell on families who are already struggling enough. And I'm hoping, and I'm seeing and witnessing, that this moment has created a conversation that we know will lead to action, because the urgency is now. We cannot wait any longer to start to call out and name the ways our system is holding up white supremacy, perpetuating anti-Black racism or Black racism, and how we need to end that. So I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate that. Mike, very glad that you're with us this morning. So we're just opening up with a question of sort of how would you kind of describe the current state of childcare right now, and sort of what lessons are we learning as we navigate the pandemic?
Okay, so I have a feeling some of what I'm going to say, Mary and Deborah have already said, but since I got a little late to the game, bear with me. I think part of what I had been asked originally was to talk about the state and where we are in terms of the state policy. So I sort of did my little outline along those lines. I think Mary's talked about some of those pieces, but just so everybody understands that there was a state budget agreement. There were no cuts to childcare. There were some increases for vouchers for emergency workers and essential workers, some stipends for programs to reopen. The preschool dollars were paused, and that's kind of where we ended up. That the biggest part of the agreement in many of our minds is the move of programs, for the most part, from the Department of Education over to the Department of Social Services, except for the state preschool piece. And then there's a master plan that's supposed to come along, and there's really a change in discussion, which has to do with talking about the whole child versus school readiness, which I think has really been brought to bear. And I've been in this field for more than 40 years, and the debate between the school readiness people and the childcare people has raged for all that period of time. And this is the first time that childcare has really become the focus as opposed to the school readiness conversation. So I think that that's been a big change, and that I think in very many ways that's been caused by the pandemic and the recognition of people being able to go to work. They need childcare, and it can't just be a 2 or 3 hours a day. It needs to be full day, sometimes 12 hours a day. Schedules that are very odd, and not odd, but they're not your normal 9 to 5 schedules for a lot of the folks that Mary was talking about in terms of being emergency and essential workers. They work weekends, they work evenings, they work different time periods, and our traditional school day just does not accommodate to the needs of working parents. So I think that's been a big piece, which is the recognition of the essential role of childcare. We've been seeing lots of news media coverage of it, a lot of attention, federal bills. Mary talked about some of those. The whole issue of affordability, which has been on the front page for a while now, but that's become really an issue that people are really recognizing. And then if you start looking down the road, while we sort of dodged the bullet in terms of the state budget this year, you start looking at the impact of the economic crisis that has been created because of that pandemic, that we're looking at a loss of state income, and we're not really sure that there's going to continue to be federal bailouts that are going to go on forever and ever, which means that looking at the 21 to 23, 2021 to 2023, a fairly significant amount of loss of state income, which we don't even know what that will be and how that will impact the field in general. But what we have seen is that family childcare, for the most part, stayed open. 75% of providers stayed open, whereas center-based care pretty much closed down. A lot of that's because it's on school campuses, and the school campuses have closed down, but only about 25% of center-based care closed down. Even in the private sector, community-based childcare and centers has closed down, and because of the public health guidance, may not be able to open up again because they can't make the numbers work. They can't be able to, these chat things come popping up, and it sort of distracts you. So the centers aren't going to be able to reopen, given the fact that there's 10 kids or 12, even 12 kids in a room that would hold 24. The numbers just don't work. And that's an issue I think that could be ongoing, that we have to do something, because most kids are actually in center-based care, not in family child care. So most babies are in family child care, and now we're seeing a lot of school-age kids in family child care, not for the preschool hours and the after-school hours, but all day long, because the schools are still closed, and that's going to continue. And the question then becomes, are we really asking family child care providers who they don't even make minimum wage, as Mary said, mostly Black and brown, now we're asking them to become the kids' teacher during the day as well, whereas the teachers who are in the school systems are able to stay home. I think that's going to be a big issue. And then looking a little bit further out, the whole social justice piece really lifts up the whole issue around pay and benefits for providers. The fact that you just barely make enough money to live on. I think that the whole issue of the way that quality rating systems have been created over the last decade really begins to fall apart based on how the literature out of academia that bolsters Those programs really have been focused mostly on centers, mostly on not in community-based organizations whatsoever. And what is quality when you're talking about community? And again, what Mary said about engaging with parents, engaging with the community in terms of putting some of these things together. The Ivy Tower has, Ivy Tower, is that right? The Ivy Tower has really not been very good about reaching out into the community and looking at that research. There's very little research on family childcare. There's, in terms of what's going on in family childcare. I only know of 2 researchers, whereas you have hundreds of people doing research on centers at universities all throughout the country. So I think that that's going to be something. The other thing that has really been lifted up in all of this is the fact that our voucher programs, and my agency is actually the largest purveyor of vouchers in the state of California, you don't ever get enough, your income can never be enough to be self-sufficient and continue to have a voucher. It's about, $30,000 short for a family of 3 before self-sufficiency. And I think that that's one of the pieces which keeps all these essential workers who are mostly Black and brown down, is the fact that they can't get, they either have to make a decision between taking a better job or getting childcare, and childcare being so expensive, they often turn down all these opportunities. So there is, racism built into that system. Now I do have to defend the fact that vouchers do help a lot of people and sort of start to get out of poverty, but we don't help them get out of poverty. And that's something that really has to be looked at. And then the whole issue of how we train childcare providers and how we're doing that, looks like there's a lot of discussion about online training, and yet a lot of people don't have access to it. There's been a movement towards apprenticeship programs, which look fairly promising because you get credit for having lived experience and actually doing the work. You don't just do the book learning, you actually do the physical learning. So I think there's going to have to be really a rethinking of how funders fund academia to really engage with the community and really engage with the field. And I think that, it's very complicated. Let me put it that way. But in some ways, I feel more hopeful in many ways than I have in a very long time. But I'll stop there.
Thanks, Mike. That's helpful. Yeah, I want to come back to sort of this quality discussion in a minute, but I want to go back to something that Mary had brought up. Mary, you talked a little bit about some of the things that you're hearing from families and parents, but what else are you hearing from families and parents during this crisis? What is needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think every parent is really scared. It's a very extraordinarily stressful time for the families who are able to work from home and homeschool and provide all the meals. And I mean, food's running out, money's running out, unemployment's running out, everything's running out. And with things not seemingly getting better, it seems, that stress and anxiety is just only increasing. I think for our families who are out there, who are working, some of them are the only breadwinner and are out as essential workers. Sometimes it's 2 family members who are essential workers. And so they're just so petrified of coming home and exposing their children. It's just, I can't describe just the anxiety they're experiencing. And then, Mike talked about the flexibility of the vouchers, and as childcare programs are, determining whether or not they're going to stay open or not, for families who have a childcare voucher, they essentially, let's say their family childcare program closes, they can take their voucher and try and find another location to bring their child. And I also want to just lift up family, friend, and neighbor care, which has also been one of it's like that expression, like the stepchild of the family. Like, it's always been seen as not quality and not a good place to leave children, when in fact that's a lot where families choose around trust and culture and community. And so with a voucher, you kind of have flexibility and options. For parents who went to a childcare center and signed up there, and the childcare center is paying for their care, if they close, that parent has nowhere else to go. They're back on the waiting list with the 2 million other eligible children. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety for families who aren't essential workers but are needing to go back to work, of not knowing if their program is going to be there, if their childcare affordability is going to be there. And so all of that is just very worrisome. And our families who have children with special needs, from the very beginning, have just talked about the fear they have about their inability to support their children with their learning needs. And while districts have, made all efforts to try and support children who have IEPs through Zoom calls to do occupational therapy or behavioral therapy, children don't want to do occupational therapy on a Zoom call. And so just that extra level of stress. And I just think when you add on, being a low-income family, being a low-income family of color, having a child with special needs, surviving any type of trauma you're experiencing, like all of the layers on top of each other are just compounding. And we're just, we're really worried. And all we can do is just try and channel that experience and that frustration and that fear and that anxiety towards policy change and systems change. And so, and community building. I think for our members who have felt abandoned, they have us to be able to vent, to be able to speak to other parents who are going through the same thing. And then also, we've had 2 meetings with Senator Feinstein and Senator Harris. We've been bringing them, well, not bringing them, but meetings with people in the Capitol. And so just really trying to be able to channel that frustration so it has some place to go.
Yeah, that's helpful. I think we keep describing sort of this cliff that we're either already at or approaching for a lot of providers, and then also especially for the families. So Mike, I want to bring it back to you as we think about sort of needing to focus on some policy, like what should be our focus over the next few months, particularly in this context of thinking about kind of this cliff that a lot of providers and families are approaching?
Well, the one that we're dealing with right at the moment, we're an agency that does Head Start, and we've blended Head Start with state preschool. And on my board of directors, I have an executive of an insurance company. And the insurance company, we just renewed our policies. They have now given exception to any communicable diseases that we might encounter. And the insurance executive said, you realize, of course, that you're now the deep pockets. If anybody gets sick in any of your centers and somebody, one of the children brings it home, and somebody in that family gets sick and you get sued, you're on the hook for the entire amount, and then went on to say, and gee, board, we would be personally responsible for the liability. And so the board, of course, went and said, oh, heck no, we're not going there. So right now, there are several bills that are circulating in Sacramento that would create freedom from liability issues for the K-12 system, and there's another one for higher ed, but we don't have one for early childhood. And I think that and I don't know that a lot of the programs are, that are recognized. They don't have a board member like I do who says, here's the issue, and I'm just concerned that moving forward, that if we don't do something about the liability for all these providers, that they're just going to, that's enough to make you never want to open up again. So to me, that's the most pressing issue right at the moment.
Yeah, and especially as we look at our system, And knowing that it's mainly family childcare providers that are mostly open, sort of, how are we distributing that risk, and who are we essentially asking to kind of take on that risk to ensure that our children and families are safe?
Yeah, and I would say one other thing, which is that I checked with our attorneys and said, what do you think? And they said, all the attorneys are out there, they're hungry too, and they're sharpening their knives. That's enough to make you think twice,
Right. But as a large agency, you have sort of that infrastructure and that's
exactly right.
Able to make those choices, and that is not available to a lot of our providers. So really important to think about that liability issue. Deborah, I do want to turn back to you for a minute or two, because you're sort of sitting in this really interesting position within LA County, sort of, background in early childhood. You're the director for the Office for the Advancement of Early Care and Education, but you're sitting within Department of Public Health. So sort of the epicenter of navigating this crisis. So what have you been learning as you're sort of sitting in the crossroads and kind of a feet in both of those worlds? Oh, you're on mute.
Trying to be a good panelist and limit my background noise. That's an excellent question, Becca. So those of you who are not familiar with the Office for the Advancement of Early Care and Education, the Office of Child Care, which was our original name, has been around for many, many, many years, and was in the CEO's office of the county. And 2 years ago, made a move to public health, which at first I thought that was a very interesting move. And the more I thought about it, the more it really made sense. So there are, early care and education is one of the social determinants of public health. We know that if a child has early care and education, they're less likely to be incarcerated, more likely to have a stable home, more likely to have a higher income. When I went to my orientation for the Department of Public Health and was trained in how to mitigate a public health crisis and administer medication, I had no idea that in the next year, I would actually be in the situation of using it. So a few different things I want to elevate. Early care and education, really because of those social determinants of public health, is located in the perfect place. I've had the great fortune of acting as a bridge between the early care and education field and the public health field, which most counties do not have that bridge into public health. So working with our early childhood education response team during COVID-19, we are able to elevate the challenges that the field is experiencing and really influence how information is coming out of public health. The largest challenge, of course, is the group size right now. The other piece that we have been so fortunate to build partnerships around is tomorrow we're doing a training with the Community Care Licensing Division analysts. So we have the opportunity to build stronger partnerships. As Mary Ignatius said, there are opportunities with crisis. So we have this opportunity to have everyone moving in the same direction. One of the things that we are very fortunate about is yesterday, the Board of Supervisors for LA County actually approved a nice infusion of funding into the child care system, really thinking about vouchers for free child care for low-income families, as well as essential workers. So right now there is 15 million that the county has allocated. And I really put a call to action to leverage that money with our philanthropic community to see how we can best support our early care and education system, which is, I like to call them our critical essential workforce, because they are the backbone of our economy. They always have been, they always will be. Suddenly everyone knows it. They are taking care of today's workers and tomorrow's workers by preparing them childcare and school readiness really do go together. So there has been a great opportunity that we have in this county to build a bridge that we don't always have in other counties. So this is a wonderful opportunity, even in the middle of a crisis, to build a stronger and more comprehensive system.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to actually sort of dig into one of those opportunities about this idea of sort of building back a more comprehensive system. So sort of Mary brought up the importance of sort of family, friend, and neighbor care. Mike alluded to the fact that we've sort of have kind of created this sort of quality rating and improvement system that's sort of more center-based and not really inclusive of family child care, and certainly not inclusive of sort of family, friend, and neighbor care. So how do we best support both family child care and family, friend, and neighbor care? And how do we not just support those two settings, but how do we lift up the assets that are inherent to those two settings? So I'll open that up to any of the panelists.
Okay, I'll go if nobody else is.
We're all fiddling with the mute buttons.
Yeah, I was too. I mean, I think first we have to name, like finally name the role that both family child care and family friend and neighbor care play in this system, that they are integral to a comprehensive child care system that gives parents the ability to choose a setting that best fits their child's needs. And for far too long, they have not been recognized. And luckily the family child care providers are starting their collective bargaining agreements, and we'll hopefully see some strength because of that. But they are just constantly fighting to get recognition and fighting to get a seat at the table. And even if you look at how the state budget response was, there was inequities in how decisions were made. We held harmless childcare centers. I don't know what even for how long, maybe Mike can speak to that, much longer than we did family childcare. The businesses, because of ratio reductions, are operating at barely what they were operating at before COVID. And we have policies in place that make it very difficult to choose family, friend, and neighbor care, even if that's what you want. And so I think we first have to name it. I think we have to talk about part of the bias that exists in our system related to family child care and family, friend, and neighbor care. And we need to talk to families as to why these are choices that are important to them. From what I've noticed from our parents, particularly over the last 3 months, is just how much they care about their providers. They are so worried about their providers. These providers are second mothers or aunties or they are the other adult in our life that loves our children as much as we do, and yet we treat them very, very badly. And so we have to see this as an opportunity to just really finally name the critical role they've played, because they've been caring for children in this crisis where others haven't.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, this crisis has done nothing if not show sort of the resilience of that part of our system. They have proven to be more flexible, more adaptable, and they have remained open and serving the children at a really high critical need. Mike, were you going to jump in?
I was, and actually, we're seeing a lot of stress and trauma and kids' behavior. And providers are reaching out to us saying, can you help us? We need consultation. I had a center in the Antelope Valley call me a couple of days ago, somebody that I know for a long time. They had a child who were basically on their first or second day there, went totally out of control, and it took 3 teachers to keep her from hurting herself. School-age kid, 8 years old. Turns out she was one of our child care bridge program foster child and has emotional issues. And no one had told her. No one had told the director of the program that this child had emotional disturbance. And they needed support. They needed somebody to help them. How do you deal with children who act out? How do you deal with children who are not just docilely doing the program, whatever that program might be? And there needs to be a whole lot more consultation and support for all providers, and not just, you know, those who are considered to be our highest quality programs. I mean, that's, you know, if I was going to move my money around, I would be moving it into providing consultations to all sorts of childcare providers, and not worry so much about, you know, are they a level 4 or level 5, to be honest with you. And the other thing I would say about our family, friends, and neighbor care, if we pay for it, we're only allowed to pay 60%. I think it's 60% or 65%. I forget, something like that, of what a family child care provider gets, which often means that you're getting less, way less, I mean, not even minimum wage. We're talking about $2 an hour. And, you know, we're basically exploiting people to take care of somebody that they know. You know, I mean, you know, my story is that when my wife and I had our kids, my mother-in-law came to live with us, and we didn't pay her anything, but we built her a house, and she lived with us for 20 years. So that's, you know, I mean, you should be compensated, whether you're a family friend or neighbor or a family child care. And there are a number of foundations around the country who are now looking at family child care and family friends and neighbors in a much different way than they have before. And I think that that's something that really we could use a lot more help in that degree.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So on that point, let's have a real conversation about the wages and about compensation. So how do we ensure that we have sufficient wages within our workforce?
I will jump in first on this. Many people know this is one of my favorite issues to talk about. So there is a dynamic tension between qualifications that has been an extreme push and compensation. The state of California has invested some money into increasing the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities of our early care and education workforce, but it does not run a parallel track to compensation. If an early educator actually gets a degree, they are not paid more. So elevating the fact that the average preschool teacher, with childcare workers making much less, the average preschool teacher makes $16 an hour in California, while a kindergarten teacher teaching the next group of children, still an early childhood educator, is paid twice as much. So I really would like to elevate an issue that needs to be tackled, which is if we are asking our early care and education providers to have higher qualifications, the compensation must be equivalent and must be on a parallel track. We cannot think of them in silos. They need to go together. This is an equity issue. These are mostly women of color who make very low wages. And I just want to elevate again, they are the ones who are not getting the media recognition that they are on the front lines of this pandemic every day and are critical to us getting through it. So I really want everyone in this room, this virtual room, to recognize that if we ask our early educators to have more skills, we need to pay them the money that they are worth.
Yeah, so there has to be the opportunity for advancement, but I also think we have to think about just base salary is woefully inadequate. So even taking out the conversation of up-leveling skills, just what is an appropriate level of compensation for the work that's being done? And then if an early educator does want to make this a career, how do we make this a viable career that has opportunity for advancement, an opportunity to grow? Mary, looks like you want to jump in as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I think you know, early educators, childcare providers, family-friendly neighbors, family childcare providers, preschool teachers. We have so many names for the workforce. And I think if we just started calling them brain architects, that maybe they would get the recognition and the compensation that they deserve because of the, you know, significant and incredible role they play in the development of our children's everything. And I think that because of the underfunding of our system, we've had to pit access and affordability and quality against each other. And in doing so, all we've done is pit low-income mothers of color who need access to affordable care against low-income, often mothers of color who provide the care. And so we're just hurting each other instead of really talking about revenues. Like, we're not going to cut or pit our way out of meeting the quality like the quality job standards that our workforce deserves. And so, you know, for us, it's pushing a revenue conversation that whether it's federal, state, local, we need a dedicated funding source, and, you know, funding sources from everywhere, from the Defense Department, from education, from health, from stopping people going into prison, but going into childcare programs. There's so many ways that you can connect early childhood education and childcare to the rest of society. And so we've got to get more sophisticated around revenues. We've done some ballot initiatives in the Bay Area to raise revenues to fund childcare and raise early educator wages, and those have won, but then have got caught up in lawsuits. And, you know, that's the other part of democracy, is that it can get stalled. But we keep pushing forward and keep, you know, challenging the fact that we need revenues. There's no way to avoid that.
Mike, go ahead. I see you unmuted.
Well, yeah, I had two thoughts. One of which is we supported unionization of childcare providers for the very reason is that providers themselves don't have enough of a voice. And that's something that you know, that's the only way exploited people get ahead is to be able to be louder. And I think the union can help them to be louder. The other thing I would say is that Mary and I were on Anthony Rendon, who's Speaker of the Assembly's Blue Ribbon Commission, and we spent 2 years talking about everything that had to do with the whole young child field. And every time we would get presentations from people in terms of what's needed, we would joke about how much money was going to be needed to do that. And I think we started, after the first presentation, we said, well, we need $11 billion. You remember this, Mary, when we were in Cerritos? It was $11 billion. By the time we finished, it was somewhere around $37 billion, I think is where we ended. And everybody balks at that kind of a number, but I think that you have to name a number and you have to say, this is what it's going to take. People should not have to get paid less than minimum wage to do this job regardless. And you heard Deborah talk about $15, $16 an hour. That's the minimum wage. And you can go to McDonald's and do that. And here we're asking people to take and be brain builders and brain architects. I think that was the term. We really need to value the people who are working with young children in the way that we value high school gym coaches.
Yeah.
Add one last thing, just because I'm so passionate about this topic. The first thing I'd like to say, so 3 things. The first thing is it's very challenging if the federal job codes have multiple categories, and the first one is babysitter. And that shows how this workforce is seen. The second thing is it's challenging for the early care and education field to access labor money because it is not seen as a high wage industry. So that's something we need to change. And the third thing is, if you are passionate about this topic, Marcy Whitebook, who just released a report on the impact of COVID-19 on our early care and education workforce, is doing a webinar at noon. If those of you who don't know Marcy, She is the director for the Center for Child Care Employment at UC Berkeley and is a national expert on this issue. So if this is captivated your mind, I encourage you to join that webinar at noon. And I'm sure you can find the information if you go to the Center for Child Care Employment.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take this opportunity because we're on this topic to just put in a quick plug that next month, the LA Partnership together with United LA does have a report coming out that actually lifts up this question of the pay for the early care workforce, specific to LA County and sort of what would be the benefits of raising wages. So just a plug that that is forthcoming. We've had a couple questions come in from the audience on this issue of compensation that, so there's consensus that we need to raise wages. But specifically the questions were around then what is the sort of communications and political strategy to sort of get that done? And Mary, you alluded to that a little bit, and Mike, you did too, that this is sort of a revenue conversation. So how do we sort of build that momentum?
Yeah, and I think a number of the questions that were in the Q&A address that as well. And some of it's, there seems to be a lot more media attention around this issue. There was just an LA Times editorial a couple days ago. There have been a number of them. I mean, even the San Fernando Valley Business Journal talked about the impact of business. We got to get, and I saw that David Ratway was on the call. We got to get the business community being much more active in terms of advocating for this is important for them as well. I think you start with the business community, you start with the media, and getting this message out that this is an important issue for everybody.
It's also a bipartisan issue. I mean, Kevin McCarthy put out an op-ed about why we need childcare.
Right.
It didn't include the money that is required to make it happen, but I think where there may be conservative voices, sharing that op-ed, sharing the letter signed on by 41 chambers of commerce from across the country in support of rebuilding childcare. There's conversations happening at the federal level right now around the next COVID sort of recovery package. There's a request that a minimum of $50 billion is included for childcare because the estimates are that, it takes nearly $10 billion a month across the country to keep the existing infrastructure in place. And so that 50 billion would support the next 6 months. And so, I know for philanthropy, federal lobbying or lobbying may be an issue for you, but even if it's writing op-eds that maybe don't have a call to action, but at least describe your support for this workforce and that action needs to be taken, I think can go a long way. And when, sometimes philanthropy also has access to meetings and to decision makers that some of the advocates may not have access to. And it's just always doing everything to share and lift up this priority for you in those meetings. Or actually, when you go in those meetings, bring a provider along with you, bring parents along with you, bring the community. As you open up doors and access to power, how do you also invite those who are directly impacted into those meetings as their own spokespeople as well?
Yeah, Mary, I'm going to take a piece of what you said, and you've talked about this a lot. Mike and Deborah, you mentioned this as well too, but sort of in this conversation of sort of making sure providers are there along with us, that they're at the table with us, that families are at the table with us, but specifically though, how do we make sure that Black and Latinx voices are elevated and that we're hearing from those voices during this childcare crisis discussion? Any other ideas about how we can ensure that that happens?
Yeah, I mean, I would, look at your portfolios and who you fund and seek out there's plenty of organizations in LA who are working with families. Our sort of sister organization in LA is Community Voices. They are working predominantly with Black and Latinx families. reach out to them, ask to, do a Zoom call with their members, listen to their stories, hear and understand what's going on. There are other organizations who might be working on other issues, education, housing, anti-poverty issues. Ask them to meet with their members to hear and understand the childcare issues they're facing. We also have another webinar that's happening at 12 o'clock today, the Early Childhood Policy Council, which is sort of the new sort of state body informing the governor, the legislature, the Department of Social Services and Education on early learning. Has a parent subcommittee, and there will be a call today at 12 o'clock. It's public. It might be a little too late to get some parents who you may know involved, but we've definitely been making sure our parents will be participating and providing, their reflections and feedback. And I would just say, just any type of meeting you have, just think about how you can bring the voices of those community and compensate them, because that's the other thing that we are always fighting for, is that all of us have salaries. We can go to any meeting, we can get on a Zoom, we can get on a phone call. For a low-income mother of color, particularly a Black or Latina mother, that requires a lot more. And if you are asking them to weigh in with their expertise, we ask you that you compensate them, a gift card, grocery, whatever it is, but like really recognize the expertise they hold and support them in that.
Yeah, and Mary, I'm just gonna sort of add on to that. I think sort of keeping in mind sort of who our audience is right now, sort of speaking to philanthropy, I think as philanthropy is thinking about how they're funding people to do advocacy work, that they're asking those questions of their grantees of how are you including these voices? Not only how are you including these voices, how are they at the table with you, but just to the point that you said, and then how are we providing flexible funding so that when families do join you, they are getting compensated, their travel is covered, they have childcare, and that they're able to do that in a way that isn't sort of impacting their own livelihood. That those are questions as philanthropy we should all be asking ourselves.
And also, if you're funding research, what role are they playing in doing community impact research? And to not just go into community, get the feedback, and then turn around and make your own recommendations, but how do you work with community as partners and co-author and, give credit to community groups who are, I often say we are not a vending machine of parents. People all over the place call us up. Do you have a parent for this? Do you have a parent for that? Do you have a parent for this? And it's like, we have parents, but those are based off of building long-term relationships and building trust and building families up because of who they are and what they've experienced. There's so much trauma that you are navigating, and to build those families up to have confidence, sometimes the first time in their life, and to recognize that they have expertise and a voice that needs to be uplifted, that takes time. And so when you are working with community groups, it's really to make sure you're seeing them as partners and compensating them as such, because parents don't just drop out of the sky and are ready to just move. There's a lot of stuff that you just don't see behind the scenes that also needs to be lifted up.
Yeah, and I think a really important point of the long-term commitment, you don't just go in and do 2 trainings with some parents and then say, okay, now you're ready to sort of join me in this. It's actually about honoring and respecting the expertise they already have, making that long-term commitment to that engagement, and making sure that they're really co-partners with you in the work.
Yeah.
And that does require sort of a long-term commitment, and it's not just sort of a faucet we can turn on and off.
Right.
Okay, so I'm going to shift to think through, would love to hear from each panelist just some final reflections you have, and specific to sort of some of the things we've been talking about as we're closing out, thinking about, we have an audience sort of from philanthropy, so how can they be supportive, how can they lean in? So just any sort of final reflections, just a minute or 2 from each of you on any sort of final reflections. And Deborah, I'll start with you. Put you on the spot.
Thank you so much. A couple of things that I'd love to elevate as final reflections. first of all, again, one of the things that we have learned from COVID-19, maybe not learned, but had reinforced, is that our early care and education community is extremely creative. They have found solutions to try to stay open, to try to work within these new guidelines. And our local Child Care and Development Planning Committee, which the Office for the Advancement of Early Care and Education leads, is actually working on a revisioning of VCE practice. We know that we're not going to have a quick turning on of the light switch and going back to normal and moving into how we re-envision what practice looks like that's still developmentally appropriate and helps build the skills and confidence of our youngest children is going to be very important. The second thing is really just to do a shout out again on the amazing support that our local County Board of Supervisors has now provided to childcare and encouraging the philanthropic community to come with that, to join that cause, to leverage that money. The final thing I'd like to say is we really do need to honor the fact that several childcare providers, especially private childcare providers that do not have relationships with the state of California, are not receiving any subsidies. The fact is that they will not be able to continue to operate if there is not an influx of money to support their operating costs. So vouchers will not matter if they cannot operate and early care and education is crippled. With the increase of the cost of care under the COVID-19 guidelines, we really need to think about an emergency response for operating funds to help keep the system functioning. And that's my final thought.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Mike, I'll go to you next.
So I actually had two things. The first is that I just wanted to say that the resource and referral system that we have in Los Angeles County really upped their game and have been distributing materials and being there for folks. And the state did provide money for cleaning supplies, and it didn't matter if you had voucher programs or not, but we distributed supplies to those. And that takes people actually going out and lifting pallets and putting together packages and doing all that kind of stuff. And in some ways, they've been the unsung heroes as well, that they have continued to keep this whole piece going and being support for all those providers out there. And we tend to forget about the sort of intervening folks that do that kind of work. So, just want to put a shout out to them. At the same time, one of the issues that we have discovered is the need for real-time data. We're always waiting for people to report stuff, and there's now the technology is out there to be able to create real-time data. We put together a form that when you filled it out, it went into a database, and we knew exactly who was getting what. And some of our colleagues around the county just don't have the resources to do that, and it's a statewide issue. And so, but even just in LA County, it wouldn't be a lot of money to get everybody up to being able to provide that real-time data. I know it's something that Deborah needs desperately, and we've been giving reports on a weekly basis. But boy, being able to know day by day what's going on these days has been just critical. So those are my two pieces.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And then Mary, I'll let you close us out.
Thank you. This is a great panel to be with Mike and Deborah on, and thank you, Becca. I think, at the heart of our system, I think a lot of times in early childhood education, it's, there's a lot of people who love children and advocate for children and consider themselves children advocates. And I think we all are. And oftentimes I say, if you love children, you have to do the harder part of loving their parents as well. And also loving the childcare providers they depend on. Like when When these women have both the mothers who need affordable care and the providers who are providing it, when both of them have dignity, have respect, have the ability to work maybe just one job full-time instead of multiple part-time jobs or full-time jobs, when we can bring dignity and respect to these two constituencies, we are going to see quality rise across our system in every setting. We are going to see the outcomes for children catapult because we're compensating them. They are working with dignity. They are living with dignity, and when they feel good about themselves, everybody benefits and the whole society benefits. And so I just really want to leave everyone recognizing just that interdependent role that both parents and providers play in the life of a child, and whatever we can do to lift them up, to call out the racial disparities. I mean, this is definitely going to be everything that moves our work forward, just really calling out and naming those disparities across our system. Can we hopefully get to reaching dignity for them?
Thank you so much, Mary. Appreciate it. I want to thank each of our panelists for being here today. Really, really appreciate your insights. I thought this was a great conversation, and just want to express it's just such a joy and an honor for me to work with each of you. I really appreciate it, and just want to thank you for the work you all do day in and day out. So Parker, I will hand it back to you to close us out.
Thank you, Becca. And I just want to also thank all of our panelists. I had high expectations of you coming into this, and you exceeded those greatly. I found this really moving and insightful. And Becca, I can't tell you how much I appreciate how skillfully you moderated this, especially since all of you participants, attendees, we had more questions from all of you than we could get to in an hour and 15 minutes. So obviously this is an important issue to all of you, and appreciate the insightful questions. I just want to offer one final reflection as well, just building off of what you were saying, Mary Ignatius, which is that clearly what's happened here is we have systems that were designed for a 1950s society, for one working parent who could have a wage that would support a family. And we are decades past that. And wages have not grown consistent with the cost of living. And that has created a burden predominantly on people of color, as Mary rightly points out. But and in addition, it's just a system that fundamentally does not reflect the realities of our society, where millions of people are forced to have both of the parents in the household work, and unfortunately to work multiple jobs because of the wages. We have to create a system that actually reflects the lives of working people today. And until we do that, we're going to have this problem, and it's going to keep getting worse. So I just can't tell you how much I appreciate all of your comments. And I know that everybody listening and participating and asking questions is on board with this. So I look forward to taking some of the comments that you all as panelists have made today about ways in which philanthropy can lean in, and that we can work together with all of you, the providers, philanthropy, and the parent leaders in communities to create the system that is more just, more equitable, and more resilient for all the families working so hard in our state. So thanks to all of you for this, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll be back in touch soon. Take care, everybody.